Claire first noticed the ache on a Tuesday evening while washing dishes. It felt like a dull throb just beneath the skin of her left forearm, as though something foreign had settled there. She chalked it up to overwork or maybe a muscle strain, but as the week went on, the discomfort grew sharper, accompanied by an unbearable pressure. By Thursday, the small bump was impossible to ignore. In the dim light of her bathroom, Claire examined it with shaking hands. The bulge wasn't subtle anymore. A hard lump pressed against her skin, unnatural and wrong. Panic clawed at her chest. This wasn't something that could be ignored. Whatever was under her skin didn't belong to her. She tried to convince herself to leave it alone, to seek professional help. But the thought of explaining it, being poked, prodded, dismissed, seemed worse. Instead, she grabbed a box cutter, sterilized it with a lighter, and braced herself over the sink. The first cut was shallow, the pain sharp and immediate. Blood spilled quickly, dribbling onto the porcelain, but Claire pressed deeper. Her fingers trembled as she pried the skin apart. When she finally extracted the object, she felt her breath catch. It was a small metallic capsule, sleek and shiny, no bigger than a pill. Its surface pulsed faintly, glowing with an eerie red light. Claire dropped it into the sink, backing away, her heart hammering in her chest. She stared at it for what felt like hours, unable to process its existence. Where had it come from? How had it gotten inside her? Questions raced through her mind, each one darker than the last. Eventually, she wrapped the object in tissue, shoving it into a drawer. But the image of it stayed burned into her thoughts. That night, Claire didn't sleep. When she closed her eyes, the buzzing began. A low hum filled her ears, rhythmic and persistent. It wasn't coming from outside. She felt it inside her head. Along with it came flashes of fragmented images, sterile rooms bathed in cold white light, figures in lab coats leaning over her, sharp instruments gleaming in their hands. She woke drenched in sweat, the hum now louder, a static roar she couldn't block out. Claire called in sick to work the next day, unwilling to face the world. She spent hours sitting by the window, staring out at the street, convinced she was being watched. Every passing car, every pedestrian felt like a threat. The capsule felt alive even though it was hidden away, its presence like a weight in the back of her mind. On the second day, the hallucinations began. At first they were fleeting, shapes moving in her peripheral vision, shadows bending in ways they shouldn't. But they grew worse. The reflections in her bathroom mirror didn't match her movements. The walls of her apartment seemed to breathe, stretching and contracting like lungs. The buzzing in her head formed words, faint whispers, indistinct but commanding. Claire knew she was being tracked. The capsule was just the tip of something larger, a conspiracy that wanted to control her, to strip her of her agency. She began tearing apart her apartment, convinced there were cameras in the walls, microphones in the light fixtures. When she found nothing, her paranoia only deepened. On the third night, Claire spotted the figure outside her window. It stood motionless on the sidewalk, cloaked in shadow. She couldn't make out its face, but she knew it was watching her. When she looked again, it was gone. But that night, she woke to find it standing at the foot of her bed. Her screams echoed through the empty apartment. She reached for the nearest object, a lamp, and hurled it at the figure, but it dissolved like smoke, leaving only a faint static in its wake. Claire sobbed in the dark, her mind unraveling. By the fourth day, Claire was convinced her only option was to escape. She stuffed her belongings into a bag, leaving the capsule behind, and fled her apartment. The city felt hostile, every face on the street a potential enemy. She didn't know where she was going, but it didn't matter. She needed to get away. As night fell, the buzzing in her head intensified, drowning out her thoughts. She felt like she was being herded, funneled toward an unseen destination. The streets grew unfamiliar, the buildings towering and oppressive. Finally, Claire found herself in an empty alley, her heart pounding. She turned and saw him. A man stood at the entrance of the alley, his face warped and wrong like a mask stretched too tightly over a skull. He didn't speak, but Claire felt his command in her mind. "Stop!" Claire screamed, pulling a pocket knife from her bag. She lunged at him, her vision blurring, the world spinning. Her blade found flesh, and the man collapsed. Blood pooled around him, bright and surreal. Claire stared at her hands, trembling, the knife slick with blood. The buzzing stopped. The world snapped into focus. The man on the ground wasn't a shadowy figure. He wasn't an agent of a conspiracy. He was a stranger, his face frozen in a mask of terror. Claire staggered back, the weight of what she'd done crushing her. The capsule, the whispers, the figures, they had all been in her mind. The police arrived minutes later, alerted by her screams. Claire didn't resist as they handcuffed her, too dazed to speak. The paramedics took the body away, their faces grim, their words muffled in her ears. She heard someone say, delusional, and another mention psychosis. Weeks later, Claire sat in a small, padded room, dressed in a thin hospital gown. The doctors had diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia, brought on by years of untreated stress and isolation. They told her that the capsule had never existed, that the hums and whispers were auditory hallucinations. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were lying. At night, when the lights were out, she could still hear the faint hum in her ears, and sometimes, in the reflective surface of her meal tray, she saw shapes shifting in the shadows, watching her.